Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cinephiles podcast. We are on episode 3, and we are now moving on from Wicked and going into board games. My guest is Tony Tandeski. He's been a good friend of mine for, I think I say in the podcast, a good 10 years, which is crazy. And he owns a small business called the Rook Room, soon opening up a brick and mortar here in Des Moines, Iowa. And I thought it'd be really interesting to talk to him about board games, but also we've been going to movies together for as long as we've been friends, and we have a lot of the same interests in those as well. So I thought, why not talk to Tony and get some insight on upcoming board games, kind of relating to movies and talking about movies, and we get really deep into universes and things like that. We're going to keep this train rolling, and please enjoy my talk with Tony Tandeski.
The Cinephiles Podcast.
All right, so Tony, tell me, the first thing I wanted to talk about is what are you currently working on right now? Meaning, what is your business?
My business is the Rook Room. It is a board game lounge and cafe, at least to be. We're in the final stages of signing all the paperwork on it. So hopefully have a brick and mortar store maybe by the time people are listening to this.
Really? That fast?
Yeah, I mean, we'll still open in spring 2025, I think, but we'll have the keys and stuff. Hopefully in the next few weeks.
Yeah, so you can get started on it. And
yeah. But if you're into anything board games, TTRPGs, like Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, puzzles, murder mysteries, trivia, bingo, music bingo, we're into it.
You have a lot of events too, monthly and bi-weekly? Or
like pretty much every week, multiple,
because you have Prism
I feel
Tabletop.
like I don't have any time, but it's great. It's a great problem to have.
What's your most popular event that you do?
Most popular by far, Puzzlepalooza. So you've probably never heard of Puzzlepalooza, but it is competitive jigsaw puzzling, which we did not know would be such a big deal here in Des Moines, or everywhere really. And basically first to finish the puzzle wins, but we throw in some sabotages too. So you might go topless. That only means via the box top, not your actual physical articles of clothing, as well as mitten. So yeah, that one sells out in about 2 minutes. In fact, we've had 3 people on 3 different occasions say those tickets are harder to get than Taylor Swift, which
Really?
That's a badge of honor. We like it. Yeah.
That's impressive. Didn't the Eras tour just end?
I think so. Yeah,
It just wrapped
overseas.
up overseas.
Yeah,
and it's like the highest or like the best selling music tour of all time. So
what you're saying is now that tour is gone, we are the hottest ticket in town, the hardest to get ticket.
Yeah, exactly.
In the world.
Yeah. So you have those events. I know you have a website.
Yes, therookroom.com.
And you have merch and stuff too there. You have
We do.
You have your own puzzles.
We have our own puzzles. We partner with local artists. We split all the profits with those artists as well. So if you want any incredibly unique puzzles, it's a great gift. We come in 70 pieces, 100, 500, and 1,000 pieces, all available at therookroom.com, as well as nerdy merch, whatever feeds your inner nerd, your inner geek.
Yeah, I remember during COVID, you were doing Rook Room stuff, and you had Jackbox on Twitch.
We did,
which was awesome.
Yes.
Because I was in California at the time, and I could just join in and play.
Were you ever in the room with the British kids who got a little wild?
I did. Yeah, I think it was one of those because I was going crazy by then, just stuck in our apartment for however many months.
Yeah, we had some crazy British kids that were dropping some Brit language in there. Kind of had to censor that, but no, that was a good time. That was a weird time to start a business right before the pandemic, when your whole mission is bring people together over a shared love of games, and then
right.
It's like, no, don't share any games, don't come together, please stay far, far away. Yeah.
And you had to do that for a little while.
Yeah, that was like a year. So we did virtual events like you're talking about. We did virtual trivia events. That's when we got into puzzling, because all of our artist friends couldn't go to their markets that they were used to getting that income. So we were like, give us some art that you've already worked on. We'll slap it on a puzzle. We'll get you some profits. So yeah.
So in the end, it kind of paid off.
Yeah.
Because you got some connections and stuff through that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so I have you on the podcast because we've known each other a long time. It's been better part of a decade now that we've been friends.
Yeah.
And we go
longer than I want to admit.
We go see a lot of movies because Trisha won't kill me for saying this, but Trisha loves movies, but she also isn't a huge movie theater person. So there's a lot of times that she'll say, I can wait until that comes out on streaming and we can watch it where we can pause it and go to the bathroom or whatever. And I love the movie theater experience. I love like just the feeling of it. Ever since I was a kid, it's like one of my favorite things to do. And now that you have a lot of those brew cinemas or whatever you want to call them, like what we have is Flick's Brew House. It's nice to go and like have a drink and like get some food and see a movie. And especially if it's something that I even like going to see things that are classics that like they re-release in theaters. And so Tony and I go to those all the time. I mean, we've seen new movies on top of, like, we saw the extended cut of The Return of the King at Flick's, and that was like 4 hours long, and we just sat through the whole thing and watched it. That was a couple beers for that one.
No pee breaks though.
Yeah. No, I was impressed. Like I didn't. Did I get up? I might have.
I mean, at least you had seen it like a good 20 times by the time.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so
And that's the nice
fine.
thing about it is like I can get up to that, like get up and go to the back because I know I've seen it. But I've seen like Back to the Future, and we've seen quite a few. You saw Superman with me, the 1978 Superman. But we like movies, and we go and we talk about movies all the time, and we go and see them like pretty frequently. But I was gonna kind of tie it into Rook Room a little bit and just kind of ask you, like, do you have any, so like we go to, like I said, Flick's Brew House. Do you have any inspiration from places like those brew pubs for the Rook Room?
I mean, I think that's kind of what we're getting at in general with the Rook Room is these places are like Flick's, providing an experience for people. So you're not just going to the movie. Do you remember the days when like you would go to the movie theater and you wouldn't have a reserved seat? You would just like go find
seating.
one.
Yeah.
Which gives me so much anxiety now to just think that I would like go early and just hope for a good seat,
right?
And fight people for it. But like now it's an experience. You're going there. You're usually dining. I know Flick's does events before certain showings too, where they'll, have trivia or something, and they make an experience all around, which is what we're going for the Rook Room. Like most places have a game store these days,
Sure.
Game comic book store, something like that. But what we're providing is a community. We always say at our core, we're building community among gamers through games, but also providing an experience too. So you're getting the full treatment as far as like drinks, themed atmosphere, people who probably like the same games as you, or at least
Sure.
into games as much as you, but is also approachable to people as well, which
Yeah.
is, I think, what these movie theaters are good at doing, and kind of what makes a movie theater a success these days is what are you providing extra on top of that movie as far as the experience. People have limited time to go out, and they want
Yeah.
to spend it in a place that is like a full night. You get
Right.
dinner, you get a drink, you get a themed drink, you get like trivia before the movies. They want all those things.
Right. And they also are really good at like making it, because I know you guys are a lot about being local too, and like
Yeah.
uplifting local shops and buying local and things like that. And I feel like a lot of these places now also do that. Like with Flicks, they have a lot of local specialties too that kind of, help out the community, or they collaborate with the community. They also have a lot of like special, like sometimes they'll say, give us feedback. What movies do you want to see back in theaters that we can, show, and you guys can come see that you're excited about. And so, you can see that in them too. And I think that's a lot of fun. And I've noticed that with the Rook Room as well.
Yeah.
Asking the community questions.
Yeah, we've had a survey going for ever since before we even started as a business. Before we did our first event, we had surveys going online because we just wanted to know what people were into, what they kind of want to see out of us. But we've worked with Flicks also, to your point about like, what do you want to see in movies and stuff? So they were doing like a Clue movie, and so we played Clue beforehand in their lobby and stuff like that. And yeah, they're all about community collaboration. I know the two brewers there, they do a lot of stuff in the community as far as like collaborations with other local breweries. If you're from out of town, you probably haven't necessarily heard of them, but like Confluence, great brewery in town, they work with them. Cabco, Court Avenue Brewing, work with them. So like they're working with all these other breweries too to do cool collaborations and stuff. So they're very community oriented, which we love to see.
Well, and Flicks has their own beers that they brew, but then on top of it, everything that's on tap is local. So whether it's their own or it's on the other side, they have stuff from all the local breweries as well to kind of shine a light on them. This is going to sound really stupid because I went from like really in-depth conversation to a really kind of simple question. What is your favorite kind of movie? Is it broad?
This is a hard question. And it's probably going to sound nerdy. My answer is anything like adventure-y. So like
Sure.
you mentioned Lord of the Rings, we've gone to Lord of the Rings. Like anything in that fantasy realm, 100% I'm in. It could be getting the worst reviews and I'm probably still into that. I spent all day today watching mini documentaries on YouTube about the original Lord of the Rings and Hobbit animated films. I guess they're films.
Oh, the Ralph Bakshi.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that stuff always gets me, whether or not it's getting good reviews. But I loved like seeing how it was made and how they used the like rotoscope animation technique and stuff with like all those movies.
Right.
So anytime you get like any sort of saga or adventure, I mean, even dipping into sci-fi, like my big franchises are Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, like those ones, always great.
What differentiates you between like seeing a movie and like your favorite kind of movie to a board game? Do you have a similar taste, or is it something that it depends more on the gameplay?
No, I think it is true that there's crossover because I love anything with a story, anything that like has a good build up, has a good theme to it, has some lore connected with it.
Sure.
Like that's the things that I love about Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, is that you can dive so deep. I mean, if you want to get into Lord of the Rings, there's all the books by J.R.R. Tolkien. Then there's the ones from his kids, people that have written like expanded universe things. And then that ties directly into, you know, the origins of Dungeons and Dragons, TTRPG world. That like, if you can create an epic story, I am 100% sold on it.
Yeah, I was just talking to Trisha about that because we were just sitting around and we're tired of watching, like, you know, with a newborn, you're like always watching TV and things. And we've watched a lot of movies and stuff, but I just put in the first Harry Potter because that's like something around this time of year that I always seem to gravitate to. It has that kind of like Christmassy vibe to it. And I was telling her, like, you know, they came out with some other stuff. You know, they had like Fantastic Beasts, and they've had, you know, some, you know, outside of Harry Potter himself stuff. They've had the video games like Hogwarts Legacy. But like, I told her, I said, this is still kind of untapped because of how much the world building affects. Like, that's what's so appealing about that universe is like, it feels huge, but it hasn't really been explored outside of like Hogwarts Castle.
I know this is adding like a third element to this movie podcast talking about games, but like as far as video games go, like the Harry Potter Legacy video game, like I went into that hard just because again, you're exploring this lore, this backstory that they've added onto that. I know it started with J.K. Rowling, and I mean the universe has expanded way beyond her as well,
right?
Because now there's the theme parks, there's the movies, there's video games, there's board games, there's everything that you can get like so deep into this expanded universe lore. And it was interesting to see them exploring a time period and like topics that didn't exist in the video game that then connects you back to those movies even closer, even harder. So like you go back and watch the movies and you're like, oh, now I'm getting a little bit more flavor text from that video game as well.
Fantastic Beasts, I think, had a really great start when it came to like adding to the lore. They added like
keyword start there.
Yeah, like because they added to the lore and it was a different time period and they didn't super focus on anything Harry Potter related besides, you know, just like some name drops like Newt Scamander and things like that, which became kind of the forefront for a while. And I liked how they introduced like, you know, the American like how like let you know like Hogwarts isn't the only school. Like, you know, in the movies they had, you know, Durmstrang and Beauxbaton and all that, but like they didn't have like, it made you feel like, oh, well, how far does this go? And it's like every like continent has its own wizarding school.
Because obviously I needed to know exactly what house I was in Ilvermorny.
Yeah, exactly.
Immediately.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
And so I was like super excited about that. And I remember Trisha talking about that too. She's the one who got me into the Fantastic Beast, the first one. And then like, I felt like they kind of doubled down on, like, they got too safe and they were like really scared of like really trying new things with the universe, even though it's so big. And so you got into the second and third movies, and I think they weren't as well received because it was like, okay, now we got to tie this into what people know. And I feel like Star Wars gets stuck with that too. Like Star Wars has a really hard time letting go of just the major like Skywalker saga. And like it always has to have some kind of tie-in with the Skywalkers, or it has to have a tie-in with a character you know. And that always, and people have said this a million times, but that always kind of gives it a smaller feeling of the universe. It like shrinks the universe down because everyone has some connection to the thing you already know. And so even more so than Star Wars, I feel like Harry Potter really is like a prime place where it's like you could literally like just drop in at a random time period in a random place in the world and just apply what's already been kind of set up in the rules of the universe, and you could have something that's really good. But it's just not, they haven't really quite committed to it yet.
Yeah, I think whenever whoever the powers that be are, the production companies, the directors, the writers that are putting it together, they find the most success, I think, historically, in finding those little slice of life pockets or the stories that are not told, and they're allowed to get a little creative. Because like you said, with Hogwarts Legacy, they dumped you into something that has like some little nods and references to the things you know, and it takes place at Hogwarts, so that's like a familiar setting, but like completely new story with completely new story elements and backstory elements with like the dark magic and some of that stuff. But I don't know if you've seen the new Skeleton Crew at all.
No,
with
I
Star
haven't.
Wars, but
No.
I think that's where it succeeds too. Is like all of a sudden you're doing this like slice of life. You don't know any of these characters. They're not connected to, you know, Anakin, Luke,
Right.
Darth Vader, you know, Palpatine. There's none of these like through threads, at least yet. I mean, there might be eventually, and it's part of the larger story. You can see where it fits into the Skywalker saga, but they're taking a risk and going with something that is like 80s nostalgia, like Goonies dumped in Star Wars universe, and like all of a sudden it's getting like these really good reviews and everything.
Right.
People really like it, and they're latching on. And I think there's 3 episodes out now, and people love the episodes so far.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, you took a risk, and it might not have paid off, but every time they do, it does seem to pay off, because it's people want to see what else is in that universe, whether it's these small stories in a larger universe, or you know, these people that you didn't know that connect back, or a different time period. But those always seem to hit with audiences.
Right, I agree. And that's how I felt with The Mandalorian when it started, except for Mandalorian never quite, you know, jumped the shark for me or anything like that. It's just when it started, it was like, when does this take place? Who is the Mandalorian? Where is he? What does he do? And like the whole first season especially was just kind of getting to know, like you said, it kind of ties in with some stuff you already know, like bigger stuff's going on around them, but it's kind of this Western fun, like new, like kind of slice of life. And I think that's why it was well received. And the reason I think it kind of started just to a little bit trickle is because then they started introducing more of characters, you know, which is cool. It's cool to tie it into something like Clone Wars or something like that. But when you have, you know, I just love when you can take something like, I just love, like, for instance, like Marvel, you know, you have the big events like the Avengers and things like that. And when they first were pitching the Daredevil show on Netflix, before it was like, it did what it did, it was still great. But they were like, this is going to be in the same universe. And they deal with the Battle of New York from the first Avengers movie with Daredevil, but they just barely hint at it because it's just Hell's Kitchen. It's not anywhere beyond that. And so they're like, oh, because of the destruction of this that happened in Avengers, they say it much more poetic than that, but they're like, because of the destruction in Avengers, now, you know, there's new, there's all kinds of real estate stuff going on because they're rebuilding and they're reselling, and there's gangs taking over some of these destroyed buildings and rebuilding them and making them corrupt. And it's just Daredevil dealing with this low street level stuff. And I always thought it'd be really cool in like Endgame or something, where during like the snap or something, you could see like Daredevil on the street and like just some random person gets dusted from the snap. And that's really all you get from it. Or he gets dusted, or Karen Page or something random, because it's a cool tie-in. Like you can always have like these high, big, huge stories, and then just have like the reactions from people who would consider themselves nobodies in a story. And like how Luke started. So like in Star Wars, it's like you have the big stuff going on with the destruction of the Death Star. And they do that. They do a good job with it a lot of times, where it's like, you know, now we have a new government taking over now that, whether it's, you know, we're dealing with the First Order stuff or we're dealing with the Empire, and like the Empire's fallen. And so here's like kind of the remnants. And so you see like remnants of stormtroopers, and you see like clones that are like begging on the street. Like that's all really cool because it's like, it ties it in, but it's really subtle, as opposed to like, and then the Mandalorian walks in and Darth Vader comes in and attacks him and he has to fight Darth Vader. Like sometimes that bothers me because it's like, now you're making the universe smaller because everybody runs into each other.
Yeah.
And so going back to Harry Potter, it's one of those where I feel like they just dipped their toe in that idea of like kind of having its own branched out smaller stuff. And then they got really scared and they're like, now Dumbledore shows up. And now, and so I'm still waiting for like as opposed to doing a TV series of Harry Potter and retelling Harry Potter, which people love those movies, whether they are well told or not, it's waste of time in my eyes, because it's like you could totally like make a Harry Potter series and name it obviously something else, but like have it take place during when Harry Potter was in school, but have it like with other people in a different school or in a different part, and see how, you know, Voldemort's return is affecting this school or this town. And like that, I think, is much more appealing, but people are just too scared because they're worried that a lot of general audiences want to see what they already know. Yeah. And they just got to reboot it.
Because I mean, especially on rewatchings of things like that, like Harry Potter, where when you're getting toward the end, I think it's Deathly Hallows 1 or 2, I don't remember which, but like you're seeing where like bridges are collapsing in London and stuff, and I'm like, what are people in the city thinking about this? What are other wizarding communities thinking about this? Like they've hinted at these other European-based wizarding communities. I'm like, also, how are Americans feeling about Voldemort? Do they even know about Voldemort? Is he like a Europe risk? Is he just like a London risk? Is he a UK risk? Is he a world risk? Like we don't get to see those other stories told, so we don't know how the rest of the world is reacting. And it almost, like you've mentioned this, it diminishes Voldemort as a villain to a little extent, because it's like, well, I don't know, is he like an existential threat, or is he just like one of those like side villains that like America's like, oh, they'll handle it, no need to get involved, because you don't really see their presence. Like they're not fighting against Voldemort's presence or anything like that, so you don't really get to know how big of a bad he is, and it might put the world in perspective if you told those other stories.
Right. It's like you can apply it to history, because a lot of these stories are based off of history, like whether it's Star Wars or Harry Potter or what have you. It's like a lot of it's World War II, and like, you know, whether it's, you know, Mussolini or Adolf Hitler or something, like these are what they represent. Like these villains represent like something that is so big and it's affecting the whole world, but it's affecting the world in many different ways. And so it's like if you told the story, it's like if you told the history of World War II and you just told it from the front lines, but then like a lot of the most compelling stories that you hear that happened during the war were like at back home, where, you know, you have people putting in war efforts, you know, all these different things they're doing to, you know, help the country as it's, you know, the people are on the front lines. And so like you could tell that in a story like Star Wars or Harry Potter, where you could have, you know, a lot of like what's going on in this small, like, you know, they're not right on the front lines of this situation, but there's a really interesting thing happening that's really affecting it all the way through. And I thought like Rogue One was kind of good at that. Like it did tie in like right directly into the first movie, but like it did have a good, like, it started out like, where's this going? Like this is in the middle of somewhere we've never seen. Like, what are these people doing? We haven't seen these people. And it all kind of ties in by the end to show how much they affected that effort for the first movie to destroy the first Death Star. And so like, I think all that's really cool. And I just don't think studios put in enough effort to try to make that like happen more frequently, and I think it would keep the franchises more fresh.
Yeah, I just gave Rogue One another rewatch in the last few weeks here, and I was like, dang, this is just like a solid movie that like, yeah, you have some, sorry, spoiler alert, like Darth Vader, Leia at the end there, but like most of the movie is not about them. It's about things that are like tangential to them in the broader universe. And I was like, this is just, it is, I guess, technically part of the saga, the Skywalker saga, but like not directly. And so that was kind of exciting to see. And it is a solid movie. I mean, it spun off Andor, which I think is a solid series.
And that one got a lot of good reviews too, for kind of a similar reason.
Because you're seeing like the street level effect of these things. Like, okay, the Death Star didn't just like pop out of nowhere. Like, how was it built? You know, who is doing the labor? Was it droids? Was it prisoners? You get to see that through the eyes of Andor at like a street level element, which is cool. Yeah.
Well, and then when like in Rogue One, you earn being able to see like someone like Darth Vader, because then you're like, you know who that is. So like by the time he appears at the very end, you know, you have all these other enemies and all these other, you know, things that they're all these hoops they're jumping through to get what they need by the end of the story. And then Darth Vader shows up. And since we already have seen what Darth Vader can do and how powerful he is, it's like, oh, against these guys, like that's like a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's the same as like I've said with Star Wars, or you could apply it to anything, Harry Potter again, where it's like, you know, you could do this street level, and then at the very end of this entire journey they've been on to try to do something smaller but just as important, in the end you have like Voldemort showed up, or you have Thanos show up, and like then it's a big deal because like, well, we've seen the higher level, bigger fights on the front lines, and they're struggling. So these people, it's like a big deal. Usually they'll probably run or something, and so it's cool to see that. They just don't. I feel like they don't do it as much as they should.
Yeah, the payoff is great, and it adds so much weight to the overall story too. Like when you see Vader at the end, and he's just like crushing people, literally, figuratively,
cutting them in half.
And then it dumps right into what is the start of A New Hope, which is everyone's basically their first experience with Star Wars ever.
Yeah.
But the beginning of that movie, you're just kind of like, so all of a sudden there's Vader, this guy in black that, comes and takes over the ship with the princess on it. But I don't really get like, why did he show up there? What was he doing? How did the ship get captured? Anything like that. When you see it at the end of Rogue One, you're like, oh, so that's how this all,
right.
Like, it was all these events that like just by like the hair of their chin, the rebels got the information they needed. And like the stakes were so much higher at that point.
Yeah.
They're like, wow, this makes the original trilogy that much more exciting too, because we got to see what led into this with this street level experience.
Yeah. And it just, it expands the world again and just shows like all the different levels to it. If they do those icebergs now, have you seen those YouTube videos on like, the Zelda iceberg explained? And it's like, you go through and it's like, it's mainly lore, but it's like, you start with the things everybody knows. And then you kind of keep getting deeper and deeper into these things. You're like, what does this even mean? And it kind of you can apply that to like a universe in storytelling. And you can just like go down to like the lowest part and really like get.
Oh, and I will.
Yeah. And it's like, and that's the stuff that I think compels people the most.
Yeah.
So going back to like board games with this stuff, is there like any that come to mind when it comes to like movie franchises that have turned into board games that are like just as impressive, or that are like a good, like, it's like, oh, I want to get my Star Wars fix in a board game, or I want to get a Harry Potter fix in a board game? Not necessarily it has to be a licensed thing, but is there something similar in like those big worlds that have been around for a long time that keep getting bigger?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's somewhere where the board game industry struggled initially, because we've all seen it. We've like Harry Potter Monopoly, Star Wars Monopoly, like Monopoly
Trivial Pursuit.
Literally every single thing that ever existed. If it was a movie, there's like a Monopoly of it. Same with Trivial Pursuit. Same with Seen It, if anyone remembers the Seen It DVD days.
Yeah, I play that all the time.
Yeah. There was a theme version of all of those. And everyone was kind of like over it. They were like, I don't need another licensed thing that, okay, I'm interested to know like what Boardwalk is in the Harry Potter world, or what Boardwalk is in Star Wars. And so they had this idea that those kind of things were kind of like crappy.
Yeah.
Like I'll never buy one of those franchise licensed games. But now I think a lot of these franchises have gotten wise to that. And they're like, if we come up with a game, we're going to have to make it good. Otherwise, we're not helping the brand. We're not helping the franchise. We're not helping any of it. We're not pushing the story along. So Star Wars, they have several deck building games that are actually really good. Good mechanics, getting good reviews, kind of expands the story. You get to play as different people. Harry Potter, same thing. There's Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, which is like a deck builder game. You go through several seasons where you do different fights, and you're still exposed to the same characters, but it's like actual good mechanics. People are giving it good reviews. Just the other day, somebody came up at one of our events and they were like, hey, this Hocus Pocus, it's like a Hocus Pocus game that is based on the movie, obviously, and it's like shaped like a book and stuff. And they were like, I'm not really into these usually, but like we decided to give this a try, thinking it'd be like, okay, we'll start it and like give up because we don't like it or it's a bad game. But they're like, okay, it's good mechanics, like kind of a good story. It like leans into the movie just enough. So like, they're like, I'm going to add this to my personal collection. And I was like, I mean, that's enough of a testament right there. It's like, we kind of sometimes with the Rook Room, we're like, well, there are games that we should have because they're great games. Every collection needs games like this. And especially the games that people need to, got some dogs upstairs.
Oh my gosh. They're just like stomping around.
Some games that it's like you got to have them because they're quintessential. And a lot of times, I mean, this is what the Rook Room is good at, is buying those $80 games so you can come play them with us rather than having to, spend that money on your own. And then there's games that were like, well, we should try these, or like maybe they're doing something a little different. And so we kind of like branched out and did that Hocus Pocus game. And we're like, okay, that actually paid off because people actually like the mechanics. It's actually a decent game. So to your point, to your ultimate question 5 minutes ago or whatever, when you asked it, before I went off on my tangents, is they've gotten way better at that. And now there are a lot of games out there like the Star Wars Deck Builder, Hogwarts Battle, Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, Hocus Pocus even, that are good games. I even heard Wicked is like a simple game. I was like, oh, they're cashing in on like Wicked, right? But like people are like, it's simple and it's quick, but it's not a bad game, and it introduces some mechanics that we haven't seen before. And I'm like, okay, that's how you do it. Is you like, don't just cash in by slapping Wicked on a game that exists already.
Shoots and Ladders Wicked or something.
Yeah, exactly. You make a game that actually has some decent mechanics, and then people will be into it.
Well, and the cool thing about some games that I've noticed is like you can have a game that is legitimately good, and like you said, maybe is a little simple or it's a little quick, but it introduces some gameplay elements that you may find in more complicated games. So then when you go to play those games, you already have a little bit of a sense of how it works. So like just like the idea of a deck building game, like, you know, there are some that are really complicated that have a ton of expansions and things, and then there are some that are just simple and it doesn't take long to play, but it can actually kind of get like, it's like a gateway into that if you like it. And like, I've noticed that with like now D&D is so hot with like, it's like the biggest I think I've seen it. And now, you know, you could always do this technically with D&D, but like now they're making specifically themed D&D stuff where it's not even like licensed through D&D, but like I've seen like back in the day, they had a DC Comics kind of D&D that they're now doing a crowdfunding for to like bring it back. And because it's so popular to play games like that now, and it's all like story driven based off of DC characters, and you have the same gameplay mechanics that you would have learned from D&D, you just apply it to that. And it's like, I'm seeing that like every day there's a new like crowdfunding for like, hey, we could do, you know, DC, we could do Marvel, we could do Harry Potter, like.
And there's so many great systems out there too when it comes to TTRPGs or tabletop role-playing games. For those not in that realm, that D&D is the main one that everybody knows. But then there's Pathfinder, which I play some of that too. That's kind of a spin-off of D&D. There's a whole history with it. Look it up. It's kind of cool to look up what Paizo did with that property. But then there's all these other ones too, including like Apocalypse, which is like a framework where you can build those other systems into it, so you can pop whatever franchise you want into it or make your own, like a zombie one, something like that. There's Kids on Bikes for anyone who's really into the like Stranger Things sort of thing, which then it's this whole circle of like, well, in Stranger Things they play D&D, but also then you can play Kids on Bikes, which is like Stranger Things. So it's this full circle element of now we're doing kind of like what we've been talking about, like this street level. Usually Kids on Bikes takes place in like a small neighborhood in a small town where everybody kind of knows everybody, and it has like some kind of monster element or something like that, but it's based in reality. So you have the skills that you would have in a normal world, so it's more approachable because it's like, well, I got my bike and my backpack full of like my flashlight and stuff like that, rather than being like, okay, what is a halberd, and what's the difference between a long sword and a short sword, and what's my damage on that? No, you're like, okay, I'm in my school and I have a flashlight, and there's this weird monster coming at me, or like this gelatinous goo. What do you do? So it's a lot more approachable, and I love that things started with D&D as TTRPGs go, but now it's expanded in this whole thing that there's literally something for everyone, and a franchise for everyone too. So whether you want to latch on to Marvel or DC or fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons, or you want to create your own, you want to get into zombies, whatever it is, there's something out there.
It goes back to movies where it's like you have your preferences of movies that you like, and then you kind of dip your toe into like, there's high fantasy, and then there's kind of like sci-fi fantasy and things like that, you know, whether it's Star Wars going into Lord of the Rings or something even crazier. And so like now that like board games have that, I think that's, in my eyes, like coming from someone who's not as big of a board game person, I like variety because I have so many different things I'm interested in. Having it focus on one genre or one kind of theme, or like what feeling you get when you play it, it just makes it less interesting to me until you expand it and go, oh, you like the gameplay from this game, let's add it to this theme as opposed to this. And it just like, it makes it, the sky's the limit. It makes it so much more interesting. So now that's why we're seeing so many board games that I go to, like even just going to like Target or something, you walk in and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's like it's like a murder mystery game, but it applies to fantasy or something. And it's like, that's cool because that kind of mixes it for you. Like, like I don't want to sit and watch, rom-coms every night. Like, I may like certain rom-coms, but I'm not always wanting to watch a rom-com when I'm wanting to watch a movie.
Right.
So to do it with board games, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's why they've gotten more popular.
And I think it gives the board game creators, publishers, things like that, more leeway to kind of like we were talking about with movies, get experimental, try some new things too. Cause it's like, there's this great game called Wingspan that's all about birds and you lure birds into your habitats. All these other great things. We always like to yell bird when you're putting a bird on your board and then like talk about its cool fun facts about migratory patterns, stuff like that. But I know that's not everyone's jam. That's one of my favorite games, but like people are like birds, unapproachable. But then the company, the creator, Elizabeth Hargrave, and then the publisher, Stonemaier Games out of St. Louis, was like, okay, if you like Wingspan with birds, how about the same sort of mechanics, but like with dragons? And you're like exploring caves and then finding dragons and luring dragons into these caves and stuff. And it's like, okay, so birds might not be your jam, but then there's dragons too.
Right.
Or like you can get into migratory patterns of butterflies, which is also by the same creator. So it's like, when they find success in one thing, people are often thirsty for like tangential items or kind of reskinning, retheming, or like same mechanics, but just other themes. And I think when they find success, it only helps everybody because there's all this variety of games where we like to say, whatever you're into, you might not have found it yet, but there's probably a game out there for you.
Right. I was always interested in like Risk. I always thought Risk was like a cool concept, and I always loved like when people explained what it was, and I watched people play it and whenever I tried to play. But I was like, I'm not quite getting into like the countries fighting, like it's just not my thing. And then, they come out with a Game of Thrones Risk or something where it's like, okay, so now you have the houses and like you're each a house and you do that and like you take land. Like that was like really cool. And now it's just gotten bigger where it's like every game you can think of, if there's something that you're like, I love the concept of it, but I don't necessarily love like the themes that are being played out here. There's probably a version now, unlike, like I said, like a Chutes and Ladders of like Star Wars or something. Like it's now something that is like a good gameplay that fits the theme of whatever it is you like or a franchise you like, but it also is like you may have seen the way the gameplay works to like it enough to try it. Yeah. And that's cool.
Which to that point, I mean, there is a place for those franchise licensed games that are repeat Chutes and Ladders, Monopoly and stuff like that too. Because I mean, if you're not into board games at all, but you're really into Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, something like that, and you try one of those games, it's like Game of Thrones Monopoly, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I might like board games. That's great.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
It got you into a new hobby, and now maybe it makes you try that other game that is also high fantasy, but is a completely new mechanic, a completely original game. And now you are actually into board games when you didn't think you were before. At the Rook Room, we like to say, there's no such thing as a bad game. There's a game out there for everybody. We're not going to yuck your yum. If you love Candyland, there is zero strategy to Candyland. You're shuffling the cards. You're watching it play out in real time. There have been some very creative people that have come up with like alternate rules that kind of make it more interesting and involve some strategy. But the base game has like zero strategy involved. But if that is your game, it does have a cool theme. I went as Mr. Peppermint or whatever for Halloween because there's cool theming with that. That I mean, we're not gonna say that that's a horrible game because that game has been critical to getting people into games and dang.
They're very excited up there.
They are. They're pumped about our discussion about board games here in Candyland.
They hear us talking and they want to be a part of it.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
But I mean, if that gets in you in board games and stuff like that, that's great. Candyland, awesome. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Tony. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking. It was nice to tie in like movies with board games, and I thought that would be an interesting discussion because both mediums have changed a lot over the past few years because of people's preferences and what they like.
And there's so much overlap too.
Exactly. And so, one more time. So you're opening up your own brick and mortar.
Yep.
And when did you say that may be opening?
Hopefully we have the keys soon if everything goes right. And then we're looking at a February, March 2025 hard opening date.
That's not too long from now.
Some previews before then.
Yeah.
So if we do have any local listeners out there, be sure to get on newsletter, follow us on social because you might get some of those cool invites.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tony. Appreciate you coming on. We may have you on again. I don't know. We'll see.
Anytime.
But thanks so much. And thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it.